Once upon a time, in a small house at the edge of the valleys, lived a couple and their only daughter. Although the family was poor, they were happy. Sadly, the mother fell ill and passed away on a winter night, leaving behind an irreplaceable void. Unable to cope with the grief, the father turned to alcohol. From that time on, he became harsh and bitter, often treating his daughter rudely. One winter morning, while the wind was howling outside, the father shouted at his daughter, "Go into the forest and find some dry leaves and kindling for the fire. If you come back empty-handed, do not return to this house at all." The girl took her basket and stepped out into the freezing cold. She walked for a long time under the ancient trees, gathering dry twigs and piles of leaves. Then, at the foot of a rock, she spotted a sprig of rosemary that was still green. It seemed strange to her in such weather. She leaned down to pluck the rosemary, but the plant remained firm as if its roots were deeply embedded in the earth. So she gave it a sharp tug, and the rosemary came away in her hand. At that very moment, a voice called out, "Hey!" When she turned around, she saw a handsome young man. "Why are you uprooting the plants in my forest?"
"I didn't know this forest belonged to someone. My father sent me here. If I go back empty-handed, he will kick me out of the house."
"In that case, follow me," the young man said. He led her through the opening where she had pulled up the roots, and they arrived at a magnificent, glowing palace underground. As she passed by, a broom bowed and said in a warm voice, "Welcome, young lady. We have been waiting for you for a long time." A wardrobe cleared its throat politely and added, "To be exact, it has been 3 months and 2 days." A small mirror hanging on the wall turned toward her and whispered, "Oh, she is so beautiful. The master was right." "Who are you?" she asked. "I am the master of this palace. I have lived in solitude for a very long time. I have never met a woman as beautiful as you. If you could love me, we shall marry, and I will ensure you live in luxury with everything you could ever desire." Upon hearing this, the young woman decided to stay at the palace and soon became the master's wife. At that very moment, a proud princess who had once been rejected by the master was watching the couple from the shadows. Seeing the love the master had for the girl, she burned with jealousy and vowed to destroy this happiness. From then on, while the young woman's happy days began, she remained completely unaware of the envious eyes upon her. She had everything she could desire. The master was so kind to her that her heart gradually became entwined with his. Every night, whenever the midnight bell chimed, the master would disappear without saying a word. One night, as he was about to depart, she stopped him and asked, "Where do you go every night?" "Please do not ask me that. This is something I must do alone. As long as you have faith in me, nothing can ever tear us apart," he said. He then handed her all the keys to the palace and departed. At that very moment, the princess who was watching them secretly placed a black key among the other keys without the master's knowledge. The next day, the elderly woman who guarded the palace handed over all the keys to the girl, counting them aloud. However, when she reached the last one, a small black key, she held it in her hand and said, "Oh, I don't know this one. I suppose the master added it before he left." She then asked the young wife to promise not to misuse the keys, thanked her, and departed. However, as the days of her husband's absence grew longer, the black key became more and more etched in her mind. Unlike the other keys, it sometimes felt heavier than an ordinary key. Thus, on a sleepless night, holding the black key in her hand, she wandered through the palace and stopped before a door she had never noticed before. Unable to restrain herself, she tried the key in the lock. The door swung open, and at the far end of a small, dark room, she discovered a glowing chest. She approached and opened the chest. To her astonishment, at the bottom of the chest lay a neatly folded snakeskin. It must have been what her husband wore to transform into a snake every night and shed each morning to become human again. She let out a terrified scream, and in that very instant, the secret was shattered, and the grand palace collapsed into ruins. When everything came to an end, the young woman found herself all alone on a dry, cracked hill. She wept bitterly with great remorse, deeply regretting her own curiosity. She then plucked a small sprig of rosemary from a nearby bush and decided that no matter what happens, she would search across the world until she finds her husband again. Just then, she heard a faint moaning sound and glanced around her surroundings. Among the rocks, she spotted a small burrow that was halfway blocked by sand and stones. The pitiful whimpering was coming from inside. The young woman knelt down, brushed away the earth, and cleared the opening with her hands. Immediately, a fox emerged, shook its body, and stood before her. Even while you yourself are facing the greatest of sorrows, you saved me from this disaster. I know who you are looking for. Your husband is lost in the land of forgetfulness. No one knows where he is better than the three goddesses, the sun goddess, the moon goddess, and the wind goddess, for they travel everywhere. Then where can I find them? I know the mountain paths and the hidden roads. Because you helped me, I will guide you. I will not leave you alone in your sorrow. Thus the two of them began their journey. When night fell, they stopped to rest, and the young woman held the sprig of rosemary to her chest. Instantly, a table filled with steaming hot food appeared. After eating their fill, they fell into a deep sleep. When morning came, they continued their journey toward the golden palace where the sun goddess resided. She knocked on the door, pleaded for help, and recounted every single one of her mistakes. The sun goddess was breathtakingly beautiful. She said, "I do not know where your husband is, for he is hiding in a place where my light cannot reach. But take this golden walnut. It will help you when you face great difficulty." The sun goddess then gave her a loaf of bread and 2 apples for her journey. The young woman expressed her gratitude and departed. She continued to walk with the fox for a long time toward the silver palace, the abode of the moon goddess. Once there, she recounted her story in full and pleaded for help once again. After listening to the end of the story, the moon goddess said, "I too cannot tell you where your husband is, but I wish to help you." She then handed her a silver almond to be cracked open only in a dire emergency. Afterwards, she had her served with milk, honey, and cakes to restore her strength. The young woman and the fox expressed their gratitude and set off once more. They walked and walked until they finally arrived at the third palace, situated atop a rocky cliff where fierce winds were howling. When the young woman knocked, an old woman with disheveled hair opened the door, leaning against the frame. "It is the wind goddess you seek, is it not? I shall present your request to her. But beware, for she is fickle, and her moods change quickly," the old woman said. When the wind goddess appeared, she immediately recognized the young woman. "I have seen you both during your days of luxury in the palace, and now in your time of distress. I know your story. Now, take this pearl-colored seed and keep it for when you need it most," she said. However, the young woman could not bring herself to leave just yet. Exhausted and grief-stricken, not knowing her husband's whereabouts, she wept bitterly. The wind goddess then comforted her. "Dry your tears. I will go and see what I can find. I can go anywhere. I can pass through walls, mountains, and seas. If he is out there somewhere, I will find him." With that, she departed with a powerful gust. In the blink of an eye, the wind goddess returned and said, "I have found him. Listen carefully, for the matter is quite grave. When your palace collapsed, your husband lost all his memories. He no longer knows who he is or where he came from. He has been drifting for a long time, like a man with no name and no past." A king found him on the road. Even though he was dazed and dressed in tattered rags, his appearance and demeanor clearly showed a noble origin, so the king took him back to his palace.
There, they dressed him like a prince, but because he could neither speak, resist, nor remember his way, he was kept under constant watch.
However, that king has a daughter whom no one wishes to marry, and the king is desperate to wed her off. Since your husband remembers nothing, the king has arranged for him to marry his daughter, and the wedding is set to take place tomorrow.
Upon hearing this news, who could possibly describe the hopeless sorrow felt by the poor young wife? As soon as she regained her voice, she pleaded with the wind goddess to do her utmost to delay the wedding by 2 or 3 days. This was because she needed that much time to reach the king's palace.
The wind goddess willingly gave her word and reached the palace with a speed many times faster than before. There she found 5 tailors working day and night to sew the princess's wedding gown. The dress was only a few hours away from completion. However, the wind goddess burst into the sewing room with a violent gust, causing everything to be blown out through the open windows and onto the treetops across the river. The tailors scrambled to catch the pieces, but it was in vain. The lace was torn, the silk was stained, and the pearls had all fallen off. There was nothing left to do but buy new materials and start from scratch. Therefore, it was absolutely impossible for the wedding gown to be ready by the following day. The king declared, "I want to hear no excuses. My daughter must be married tomorrow. Find new fabric and sew all night if necessary, but the gown must be ready." The master tailor almost fell to his knees and said, "It will take at least 2 days, your majesty," but the king refused to listen. However, the next morning, when the king saw his daughter in the hurriedly prepared gown, he had to admit that it was impossible to proceed this way. Thus, suppressing his rage, he postponed the wedding ceremony and the banquet until later that day, ordering the tailors to resume their work without a single minute of rest. By that time, the young woman had arrived at the palace, her feet aching and her body exhausted. As soon as she reached the palace gates, following the clever fox's advice, she cracked open the golden walnut. From within emerged the most beautiful robe in the world. She then rang the palace bell and said, "The princess is to be married today, is she not? Ask her if she wishes to purchase this robe." The princess rushed over, and the moment she saw the robe, her eyes sparkled with greed. Although she recognized the young woman, she pretended not to know her and asked, "How much is it?" When the girl replied, 100 gold coins, the princess paid her immediately without hesitation. The young woman took the gold and moved away from the palace. Once she reached a secluded place, she cracked open the silver almond given by the moon goddess, and from within emerged petticoats, jupons so magnificent that they had never been seen before. She returned to the palace and offered to sell them. As soon as the princess saw them, she remarked that they were even more beautiful than the robe and paid the young woman a large sum of gold coins once again. Then the young woman went down beneath the stairs where no one could see her and cracked open the pearl-colored seed given by the wind goddess. From within emerged a court gown so magnificent and grand that it had never been seen before. When the princess saw the gown, she literally jumped with intense longing, for without this gown, everything else was merely extra. She could not get married in just her petticoats, so she asked for the price of the dress. This time, the young woman replied, "The price of this gown is to be allowed to see the groom." The wicked princess realized that the young woman knew her husband was with her, but because she desired the gown so desperately, she accepted the deal. Then, the young woman handed the gown over to the princess. As soon as the gown was in her hands, the princess broke her promise and shouted, "Hey, keep her outside and lock the prince's room." Heartbroken, the young woman was forcibly driven out into the palace courtyard. Just then, the clever fox emerged from the shadows of the stone pillars and said, "Do not be afraid. Locks made by men are useless against clever ideas." He then leaped onto the wall and entered the palace through a narrow opening. Soon after, he unlatched the door from the inside, allowing the young woman to slip into the palace unseen. She crossed the silent corridors and finally reached the prince's room. There, she found her husband sitting by the window, staring blankly like a man who no longer knew who he was. The young woman approached him with trembling steps, but he did not recognize her. Then she drew the withered sprig of rosemary, which she had kept all this time, from her bosom. Gently touching him, she whispered softly, "Remember the root within the earth. Remember me." As soon as he heard those words, the sprig of rosemary instantly turned lush and green again, and the master regained all his memories. He stood up, looked at her, and finally recognizing her, drew her into a tight embrace. No one should have ever seen that snakeskin. It was an ancient curse that bound me. If the secret had remained kept, the curse would have vanished on its own. But because the secret was revealed too soon, everything was destroyed. "I was wrong. Please forgive me," his wife said. "You are not to blame. We were both deceived." Upon learning the truth, the king realized that he could not wed his daughter to a man who was already married to another. As for the princess, she was consumed by a fit of rage. Her magnificent gown began to lose its luster, and the ornaments on it fell off one by one, as if swept away by the wind. The young woman and her husband left the king's palace that very day, with the fox leading the way before them. They lived together in a beautiful cottage near the sea, and after overcoming so many hardships, they finally found peace and happiness. The young woman's father, who had long been remorseful for his cruelty, finally discovered her whereabouts. He went to her to seek forgiveness for his sins and wept with overwhelming joy upon seeing her again. His noble-hearted daughter forgave him, telling him that she had never once forgotten him. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and leave a comment. If you haven't yet, feel free to subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. Bye!